Hi, welcome back. I want to go over a little bit about vegetation patterns in California, but over here I also want to introduce you to some different tools I'm trying to add to the Canvas pages that I think will be helpful um, for some of the topics that we're covering. So if you go to the bottom of this learning unit here, there is an actual map. It kind of moves around when you move your mouse. You can drag it and pull it around. And this is a map of vegetation classes in California. It's a little bit easier if you click on View Larger Map. That will give us a dedicated page where we can take a look and examine some of the features here. And I'll point out a few things that are here. One, if you kind of open this up a little bit, there are 3 layers. 2 of them are turned on. I'll turn off one just to show you. The bottom layer is kind of like the figure in your book that shows the vegetation in California, but I've modified it a bit and to highlight a couple of things. Namely, I have highlighted this sort of light green color here, which is oak woodland around the Central Valley. And I've also modified some of the features in the San Joaquin Valley based on data that I had available. So this is using GIS data and Geographic Information Systems data, and what I've done is put together a figure similar to what's in the book, but it's one that you can use online. I also created an updated version of our physiographic regions map, and so these are labeled with the Klamath Mountains, Modoc Plateau, Central Valley, and so on. Now, one thing I want to point out about this, as well as the figure in the book, is this is showing the natural vegetation as it would have been without humans converting the vegetation into some other use like farmland or urban lands. So actually, if you click on the middle one here, it will actually show you kind of the human footprint on top of that. So you can see in the green here, this is farmland, and the reds here are urban lands. So this is more of a complete picture of what the California actually looks like. But if we want to just sort of rewind that and look at how it looked in the past, this is an estimation of what the vegetation was like in the past. We don't have exact maps, but this is sort of a best guess reconstruction. Okay, a couple of things I want to highlight. Let's turn on. One other thing I'll show you as well is this button here. You can actually change the background map. So let's put an image in the background, make it nice and pretty. Okay, so first thing I want to highlight is let's start from the coast, the northeastern coastal areas. These are areas with mixed forest, and these are particularly wet environments, as are the upper slopes of the Sierra Nevada. So these have mixed coniferous and needleleaf and broadleaf forest, fairly wet. On the other extreme, we have the desert type of vegetation called desert formations. It doesn't have all of the detailed categories because it's hard to color too many things on a map, but there's descriptions of a number of different types of desert vegetation, and those are pretty well contained here. We also find desert vegetation here in the San Joaquin Valley as well. The San Joaquin Valley is particularly dry in the south. This is an area that we sometimes call the San Joaquin Desert, and historically had desert vegetation as well as grassland in this lighter color. So the Central Valley is complex. It not only has grassland, but desert vegetation, and this is Tulare Lake, an ancient lake that we'll be discussing, and it had numerous wetlands. So it was because of the runoff from the Sierra Nevada. So the Central Valley is quite dry, but it is a little more complicated because of all the water features that were there historically. Now this color with the light green and the purple This is Mediterranean vegetation, oak woodland and chaparral, something we discussed in lecture. I'm not losing my ability to zoom here, but that's okay. You can use the button. Close this. You can actually, that's a good illustration. You can actually click on things as well to see what they are. And you can drag, and if you kind of hold your mouse down, you can navigate your way around. And if you get lost, you can hit the home button to reset your view. Okay, so we have, this is chaparral, which is a Mediterranean type of shrub. And the green color is oak woodland, also associated with the Mediterranean climate. At the high elevations, we have alpine environments, which are like essentially more sort of polar, highland polar type at the very high elevations. All right, so this is a quick overview. I want to mostly show you how this works. And you can also do things like change what layers are turned on or turned off. You can zoom in to different places. And we may have some other upcoming assignments where you'll have questions based on a map, something similar to this that I'll be putting together. So I want you to try this yourself. Play with the map, try interacting with it, and try to get comfortable. Click on all of the things and see what they do, and just familiarize yourself with this. This is a way of having a more interactive online map that is much better than the figures in the book, especially if you have the physical book, which they're black and white figures.